Hello, is this thing on? I hope so. Because regardless of whether or not it's on, I'm broadcasting. Happy Memorial Day long weekend, and welcome to today's. I think I need to turn the volume up a little bit. Today's temperature check with Jeff. Today we're going to check my temperature on when it might be good to be perceived as crazy. And we're going to talk more about what I mean by that in one moment. But first, pull out your home thermometer, do as I do, and let's check our actual temperatures. 99.3, I've been out in the sun. It's a beautiful day. It's a weekend, so I'm going to resist the temptation to be a temperature lunatic and to give in to the mass hysteria around having a temperature that's higher than 99 degrees, and we'll assume that I do not have the coronavirus. So we are in a context right now where, understandably, there's a lot of conversation around mental health. We're starting to exit this very bizarre period of lockdown here in the United States, sort of once in a generation type experience to live through. Clearly, society is going to be never the same going forward in the future. A lot is going to change. And many folks are talking about a mental health crisis. And, if you spend time on social media, as I sort of hesitate to admit that I've been spending more time on social media over the past few weeks than I have historically, and perhaps more than is healthy. It's really unclear on a platform like Twitter if people are sort of en masse having mental breakdowns, because there's just so much craziness going on Twitter specifically. There's just so much craziness happening. It's unclear if people are just having crazy mental breakdowns, if it's all just a branding exercise by everybody with an audience, or if the truth is somewhere in between. In any case, it got me thinking about this idea of performative lunacy, which basically is my sort of intellectualized way of talking about this idea that actually it can be good at times in a business context. It can be good at times to be perceived as crazy. Now that sounds like a crazy thing to say. It sounds crazy for someone to say that it can be good in business to be perceived as crazy, but it's actually true. And I'm going to talk you through some of my observations as a bystander around this. The definition of crazy obviously is mentally deranged. Manifested in a wild or aggressive way. I think that definition is relevant, particularly in terms of how some of the greatest folks in business have leveraged the perception of being crazy to their advantage. So I like to ground this in philosophy, and of course, when talking about performative lunacy or the perception of craziness, potentially one of the best thinkers to look to would be Niccolo Machiavelli. Now, Machiavelli lived and died at an interesting moment in time. I think he died in like 1526 or 1527, which was really an era that marked a crossover, a shifting of the tectonic plates in history from an era from the medieval times to what one would sort of consider to be the Renaissance. So he sort of lived at that crossroads of the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. And so I think he's a particularly interesting thinker to look to at this moment in time, where we are also in this weird, I would argue, crossover from an era of globalization, which really defined my entire life. I'm in my mid-30s, and my entire life has been one of increasing globalization. And we are now crossing over into just isolationism. And perhaps this started in 2015, 2016, but is now extremely clear that globalization is done. We're in this isolationist era going forward. And in terms of Machiavelli and craziness, I think Discourses on Livy is just a phenomenal work to read. It's actually not that hard of a read. A lot of philosophy is really dense and hard, but I find Machiavelli actually really easy and fun to read. There are all of these layers of meaning, so you can spend hours on sort of one aphorism. But the aphorism that I'd like to talk about today is from the third book of Discourses on Livy. It's the second aphorism. I will try to pronounce the Italian. I'm obviously going to butcher it because I can't even pronounce English words properly. I've been calling the Pulitzer Prize the Pulitzer Prize until I was corrected a few days ago. So in any case, I'm going to butcher this. But the line I'd like to talk about is come igli e cosa sapientissima simulare in tempo la patia, which translated in my translation, let me pull up my iPad, I can tell you the translation. Whose translation do I have here? I have the Mansfield translation. So in my translation, they translate from the original Italian that phrase to that it is a very wise thing to simulate craziness at the right time. That it is a very wise thing to simulate craziness at the right time. That is my translation. But the actual direct translation, if you just type the Italian into Google Translate, is, I actually think, maybe even more interesting, which is, as he is a very wise thing to simulate madness in time. And so in the actual sort of direct translation of the words, Machiavelli is talking about the future. He's talking in a predictive context. In time indicates sort of this predictive, simulate madness in time, in the future, simulate craziness, whereas the direct translation is talking about a specific moment in time, at the right time. So actually, the meanings are different, and so you can go off on a tangent on either direction. I'm going to go on the sort of so I'll sort of take an in-between, an intermediate path. As Machiavelli would argue, one should never take an intermediate path. That's what he says in the passage. I always try to take an intermediate path. And basically I would argue that in a negotiation context, it is often very helpful to simulate madness, to simulate craziness. And actually, the folks that often prevail in business negotiations are the ones who are perceived as being really unpredictable, as being crazy, and that actually works shockingly well in a business context. And one tool, and so what's interesting is this always plays out behind closed doors, and so you'll have these parties to a negotiation. I've seen this with founders negotiating term sheets, negotiating M&A, negotiating with hires. One person will sort of out crazy the other, and will ultimately come out ahead in the negotiation. And so this plays out behind closed doors in business all the time. But with Twitter, combined with everyone being in sort of a total lockdown or semi-lockdown mode and going through this whole mindfuck experience of, well, what's going on with this pandemic and like how are we going to emerge, I actually think you're seeing pieces of these sort of simulated craziness business negotiations are actually manifesting on Twitter, and it's fascinating. So everyone now can have a view into how these things actually go down in the real world, which is there is a lot of either simulative lunacy, performative lunacy, or some might argue real lunacy. No one knows. It's impossible to tell. So latest example that I've stumbled across would be Dave Portnoy, who's the founder of Barstool Sports. He is going on this sort of insane seeming Twitter tirade against someone who he calls Suit Man. I guess he has this podcast I've never listened to or had called Call Her Daddy with these two ladies that was really popular. And one of the ladies is sleeping with this guy who's like some media executive who Portnoy calls Suit Man, which by the way is like a great moniker. And basically is just going completely apeshit on Twitter and has pulled Scooter Braun into it. And basically the impression one gets from watching Portnoy's videos about this Call Her Daddy feud with Suit Man is like the guy is just totally unhinged, and you really just do not want to fuck with him. He just does not, he just does not care. He's completely unhinged and just wants to win and is not going to be fucked with. And I think he's probably going to win whatever negotiation he's engaged in. Now, I don't know what the negotiation is. It's interesting that some of the tweets that he's retweeted have been deleted, so people are clearly scared of him. But the sort of very crazed posturing, while it seems insane, and if someone's just look at his Twitter, like you'd think, well, this guy's just another crazy tech bro founder. He's probably, like whatever, microdosing acid or something at his house in Nantucket or wherever he is. And actually, I think that this is sort of a part of a tactic in a complex negotiation we don't have visibility into, but he is simulating madness, and it's probably going to work. Elon is the master of this. So we have the Elon Musk, the red pill and the rose tweet, which is like, well, he's been red pilled, but he's also a Marxist because that's what the rose symbolizes. That makes just no sense. That's sort of completely insane. Reopen the factory if you're going to arrest anyone but me. That whole tweet. That whole set of crazy tweets from Elon. Maybe there is actually some lunacy in it, but the goal is obviously sort of this negotiative type, performative negotiative type insanity meant to achieve specific business, and that only Elon knows what that is. But it's certainly been helpful for Elon to be perceived as really crazy. Whether he is or not, I don't know. But certainly the perception of craziness has helped him, and arguably has helped his businesses. And it's really striking that in almost every negotiation I can think of where one party was perceived as crazy, as irrational, that party has prevailed in the negotiation. Almost every example I can think of. So yeah, that's my thought for today. I'd leave you with maybe something that's a little more actionable. I think a lot of folks would be too scared to sort of pull off this full performative lunacy thing. So there are these sort of small steps you can take to wade your way into it. You don't have to go sort of full Dave Portnoy, full Elon Musk. There are sort of smaller things you can do. I'll leave you with just one idea of something to just try. The next for the next business day, so tomorrow, Tuesday, when you're on email and you're sending emails, just try breaking with like a convention that everyone follows, which is to include a subject in the email. So, everyone who sends an email, you like, well, what's the subject of this email? And you write the subject like catching up or touching base or like update to the board. So you would fill something into the subject line, and it would be sort of very unusual. It's sort of bad form to not have a subject in the email. Just try tomorrow for all of your emails not putting in a subject. So just don't put in a subject, just write the email with no subject. I will guarantee you the response times on your emails will be much faster than usual. So this is not a crazy thing at all. It's just a slightly socially unconventional thing. It's sort of just breaking a little bit with common courtesy and tradition. And just by forgoing the subjects in your emails, I will guarantee you will get more engagement, fast response times on your emails for tomorrow. When is it good to be perceived as crazy? Shockingly often. That's all for today, folks. My temperature is high. Hope yours is normal. Talk to you later.